Welcome to Los Compas Lounge, a PSA for brown men.
We are your hosts. This is Raul.
This is Javier.
My name is Reuven, and this is a podcast about brown men talking about issues that matter to you. We talk about things that we don't usually talk about in the brown communities. We're just three regular compas sharing our experiences to inspire positive change. Compa, pull up a seat. We have one ready for you. So during the last episode, we talked about the issue of being brown in the pandemic, specifically the COVID-19 pandemic. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a different pandemic, a pandemic that's been going on since Columbus first stepped on to the shores of a little island called La Española. We're talking about systemic racism. We're talking about Black Lives Matter and how it affects brown men.
You know, it's very interesting that you look at it this way because it is, a historical movement in the making, and it's gone up and down, up and down. You even say globally, of all oppressed people. But, here we are, Black Lives Matter for damn sure. One of the things that I remember going to school in college is it really affected me because, I went into history and looked at historical roots and whatnot about these social racist or institutional racism, and it was always talked about black and white, and not to diminish from black and white, but racism is very complex. It's more than just black and white. It's brown, it's red, it's green, it's all of those different colors, and I think as brown men, we need to look at it that way as well and embrace these kinds of movements. BLM is real and I respect it. And I just want to make sure that we talk about, or at least explore that systemic racism it's not just about black and white. It's a multicolor. It's about power.
It's a good movement for bringing to awareness the way that Black people are treated differently by the police than white people, and not just Black. I mean, all colored people, brown, red, whatever, and it's so sad to me sometimes when you see the good movements being hijacked by chaos, by just anarchists, and it kind of looks at people that don't believe that it's like a legit movement, like say, you see, they're just a bunch of troublemakers, but that's not true. I mean, it's like they're black systemic racism is very real, and I mean, you hear in police, there's bad police, there's good police, and there's bad police, but there's a lot of there's even I heard that there's even they call themselves like little gangs, like within police, that they get like these tattoos so that this way they know, they're part of the some little gang, and there has to be a way to filter bad police out because it's legit.
Yeah, and it's good people, bad people, and I think that goes back to a bigger historical or just a bigger problem we have in our society. It's like there's so much hate, and then there's so much wanting to fight for who's on top, who's getting one on top of the next person. And that's the unfortunate part, because it affects us as people. Like, we have kids and families, and what are we teaching them? We are in charge of their social education, their family education, their values, and that's something that it kind of upset me. It upsets me too, because I do see these movements, powerful movements that get hijacked or they get diminished.
It's not one person's death. His life matters. Not mattered. His life matters. And it wasn't just one death. It wasn't just one day. It's been not 1 year, not one decade, not one century. It's been since before this nation state became the United States of America. It began with the genocide of the indigenous peoples of this land, and it moved into the enslavement of Africans, the bartering of life, this property. You look at the Constitution specifically states that slaves are not human. Women aren't equal. Only if you're a European American male do you have all rights. Why does everyone else have to live on the hyphen? I'm a Mexican hyphen American. I'm an African hyphen American. I'm a Asian hyphen American. I'm a native hyphen American. That's the reality. And I'm not black. I'm brown. But we all are black. We all are brown. We all are red. We all are yellow. We're all people of color. And like we alluded to at the end of the last episode about COVID-19 and why is it that people of color are disproportionately getting this virus. It's because we're looked at as being subhuman. We're not valued. This is why, in general, we can go out there and be on the front lines of this pandemic and get ill and die from it. This is why we can get racially profiled and get beaten to death and not have anything done to the person who beat us and killed us, even if especially when they're wearing a badge that says we're here to protect and serve the community. It's basically saying we're not part of that community. And why is that? Where did this sickness come from?
That's a good question to pose to our listeners, Ruben. Again, we challenge everybody. Well, I don't want to say challenge, but we pose that question. Why are things so jacked up and racialized in our society, in our lives? And what does that mean to you? How does it affect you as a brown man?
I remember when I was like, I don't know, probably like in the eighth, ninth grade, there was this, there was this kid in the neighborhood. He was actually my older brother's friend. He went to school with them. He was probably like in the ninth or 10th grade, something like that. And him and, I mean, let's be honest, he wasn't a good kid. He was a troublemaker. He was, and him and some friends, they stole the car. They were in a stolen car, and the cops the cops pulled him over, and I don't even know what happened. I mean, I spoke to one of the people that was there with them. This was probably like in 87, 86, something like that. The cops beat him to death. The cops, like, next thing we just heard, oh, Pablo, did you hear about Pablo? The cops pulled him over, and they probably did like a Rodney King thing, because one of the friends that was there with them, he told me, because I talked to him like many years later, that they had hogtied him, that he was just like that, and that he couldn't see, that they hogtied him, and there were three people in the car, and Pablo was the one that was driving, and then that he couldn't see because they had him hogtied, and I guess he didn't want to get hogtied or something, and kept like resisting, and that just got swept. Nothing happened.
I mean, that's a powerful story. He got hogtied and he resisted. Nobody deserves to lose their life over freaking resisting police arrest. Not even our brother, Floyd, or even Rodney King when we were coming up 20, 30 years ago. He got his ass beat. and look at the riots in LA and then the movement that was born out of that back in the 90s. It's the same stuff, Javi, like you said, got swept under the rug. This is just in our own recent history, in our own recent experiences in LA, coming up and growing up and looking at all the brown people getting their ass kicked or killed, and this stuff, it's in recent history in our own lives, and it has historical roots, Ruben.
It's true. I mean, and that's what I was gonna talk about when Javi mentioned Rodney King. It's like I said, it wasn't just one person. It wasn't just one incident. This happened with Rodney King as well. And I remember I went home and I went on the top of the roof of my garage, and I'm looking towards the south, and I see flames. Los Angeles is pretty big. I mean, if you can see flames, that's some serious stuff. And being the pendejo that I was, I said, you know what, I want to go check it out. I want to see what the hell's going on over there. And I drove over there, and I saw the madness, man. It was terrible. It was horrifying. It was sad. It was disheartening. I mean, people were destroying their own communities because they don't have the power, or they feel they don't have the power to do anything else. And I remember seeing the National Guard there. They were willingly letting people go in to just jack up that neighborhood, jack up that community. They weren't letting them out though. And they weren't, the National Guard, they didn't care. They were like, this, we don't live here. Let them burn down their own communities. Once again, it just didn't, it wasn't just 1992. You go back into the 60s, you have the Watts riots. And what happened there? The same thing. Black folk getting brutalized by the police. And during that time, you had all kinds of quote unquote riots. It's interesting how the media portrays them as riots anytime it's dealing with people of color. And out of all this ugliness, positive things came out of it. I mean, we had the civil rights movement. We had Malcolm X. We had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And then we have the American Indian movement. We had the Asian American movement. We have the Chicano movement here, in East LA. You have people of color coming up and talking about these issues in a peaceful manner. And what happens? In every single one of these instances, the police come in and they start throwing their batons, throwing their tear gases, So what we've been seeing these last few weeks, months throughout the country, this isn't the first time. You know what, Compas, I think we as a nation, and specifically as people of color, we need to read our history, man. We need to know what's going on and why it is going on. Not enough of us in general, and specifically in the community of color, we don't know our own histories, and we have this internalized racism inside of us, and the same thing that's being done to us, I see it being done within our own communities, and I'm not talking about this media thing called black on black violence or brown on black violence. I'm talking about the internalized stuff. Why do we feel that we're inferior to other people, whether it's economic, whether it's social, whether it's political, whether it's educational? We need to learn how to re-love ourselves and reinvest ourselves.
We're not taught as men, right, from our culture to love, embrace, and have all this self support, emotional support, and growth. And perhaps our parents didn't know how to teach us that, right? Or perhaps we were in a single family, or perhaps our father was an alcoholic or absent, or whatever the situation may be. But those are real issues in the brown community, especially brown men, that we struggle with.
Yeah, so now there's all this talk about defunding the police, and I mean, that's not gonna work. I mean, how could a society exist without any kind of sets of rules? So I mean, but we could like reallocate the money. I mean, does the police really need all that military equipment? At the risk of sounding unpopular, some of those the police
Pensions.
unions, those
Hmm.
those pensions. I mean, they're like almost like 100%. I mean, I don't really know like all the details, but I know that they're very sweet pensions. That I mean, they could break the whole budget. There is a need to explore the possibilities of reallocating the funding, especially in training.
Yeah, no, you know what? I agree with you, Javi, and I think that's where the misnomer is, because people just read the headlines that say defund the police, so, and they don't think about it. Defunding doesn't mean we're gonna abolish the police. Defunding is exactly what you said. We're gonna reallocate the funds that usually go to the police department. I work for a city up here in the Bay Area, and the majority of the city's budget goes to the police. And we're a suburb. We're not like Los Angeles or New York or Chicago. We're a small suburb, and they take a majority of the resources from our small town. And this is nationwide. And a big issue, Javi, I completely agree, is those pensions. When I was living in San Francisco, I was part of the civil grand jury, and one of the things that we chose to look at was pensions. In the city of San Francisco, they're going to go bankrupt because of the pensions from the fire department and police department. Because yeah, they're giving a very sweet deal. They basically they don't get 100%, but they get well over 50% of their pension. And what people don't understand, the fire department and police department in general, I'm generalizing again, they can retire at an earlier age than we can, and they can get a huge portion of their benefits. And this is something that the cities and the counties need to pay. And believe me, I'm pro union. I've been union guy my entire life. Even before I was born. And there's a need for unions. And going with that, there's also a need for reforms within labor
Hmm.
unions as well. Listeners, don't be fooled into thinking that all this stuff is not connected to money. It is. It's connected to what Raul was talking about earlier, power. And the question is, who has the power? There's
Hmm.
that old line, just follow the money, and you'll find the answer. The question is, do you really want to know the answer? And the second question is, what are you willing to do, or are you going to do anything about it once once you get
You
that
have the
information?
power.
Yeah, it's sort of like the Matrix. You have the blue pill and the red pill. You can live in this fake little la la land, knowing everything is taken care of you, and knowing that your fundamental human rights and civil rights are being suppressed. But you're okay because you have a roof over your head, you have some
Yeah.
food and everything. But are you really free? Can you ever really truly be free?
And now a brown and proud PSA.
Go to our website, loscompaslounge.com, to links for resources from today's episode.
I mean, and sometimes I get tempted to just enjoy the bliss of ignorance, enjoy life. It's like when they say, let's say that they say that a lot of people right now are making more money with that extra $600 during the unemployment.
Yeah.
That you get extra 600, and sometimes they're like, okay, well, I'm doing better right now than I was working. But I mean, you also once you get used to just getting your money and you're like, oh man, this is awesome, then you get like you get into a cycle like the people that just go generations living on welfare, and then they have more kids,
Hmm.
they get more welfare. I mean, you just get content with just being supported by the government, and then but it comes with a price because you lose incentive, motivation. I mean, that's what I think. I mean, I think that earning $1 feels a lot more rewarding than getting a gift of $1. You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, for sure. I want to go back briefly to what Ruben said earlier, about uh, defunding the police, right? And how they have these rich pensions. The devil advocate or the police officer will be like, well, shit, we put our lives on the line every single day to be protecting you guys. And the least you can do is pay us well, right? And what I would say to that is, sure, you get a sweet deal, and sure, you put your life on the line. Firefighters and police officers, I have total respect for authority, right? But at the same time, um, the discussion has to shift to a discussion in looking at training or support of doing your job right, to serve and protect, not to harass and kill, right? We talked about those stories earlier of brown people and black people getting snuffed out by the police officers. And I think that defunding part needs to, or a discussion about defunding needs to center around those topics of training, or where do we reallocate this money,
Public outreach. It's
whatever
like
it is. Yeah, outreach, education, better selection process, better reform, essentially in the folks in blue. Again, I have respect for those folks who are doing great things, but at the same time, we have plenty of bad apples, and we've seen this time and time in our communities, and then most recently with this BLM movement now.
And once again, I agree. I think we all are pretty much on the same wavelength for the most part. Um, and there's already been ongoing discussions, and it's happening. I mean, we're seeing these changes happening throughout the country, and some of the solutions, ideas being thrown out there are beginning to be proposed or put into places, reallocating. Okay, let's take out the word defunding, okay, because that scares
yeah,
people.
it sounds, yeah, it scares people.
It's reallocating the funds. You know what? I went to school for a long time to get the job that I wanted, to be able to help people. You know, one of the few professions that are still around where you don't need a college degree are firefighters and police departments. And this is changing, and it has been changing. But you know what? If you're going to be dealing with the public, don't you think it would be a good thing to have some background in psychology, in sociology, in ethnic studies, to better understand your communities you're working in? I mean, I needed that. And in most jobs, correct me if I'm wrong, in most jobs, if you break policy, in most jobs, you're reprimanded immediately. If you hurt someone in a job, even if you yell at someone in a job and make racial slurs to them, more often than not, you're fired right there and then. You know, we're not asking for anything outrageous. We're asking for what happens for real people, the day-to-day people, the working people. You know what? It's just common sense, folks. If you break your own rules, you get punished. You know, plain and simple. If you kill someone, plain and simple, you go to jail.
Let me
Plain
say
and
something.
simple.
We're really essentially talking about accountability. So if we're looking
Exactly.
at the issue of reallocation, it's accountability.
Hmm.
How do we create or infuse a system? In this case, right, it's our civil servants with more accountability, a whole lot of more accountability, because this has been in the making historically, and we're fed up. The black folks, the brown folks, the red folks are done. And good things are happening right now. Good things are happening, right? People are talking about the Confederate flag or whatever the situation is, and guess what? That's now no longer tolerated. There's accountability. And I just want to make sure that we talk a bit about accountability.
And accountability doesn't begin with the individual officer.
Hmm.
The accountability begins at the top.
Yeah, and that's
You know,
Yeah.
and it doesn't, and not just the chief of police, but also the city council members, the mayor,
hmm hmm
and all the way up.
Well,
If there's no accountability and you see certain individuals acting a certain way, people will mimic that and people will learn it's okay to do that. So accountability needs to begin not from the bottom, but from the top. And I mean
leadership.
from the top,
Hmm.
top,
Yeah.
from the
well,
way top.
right here in right here in SoCal, Libaka, you guys heard
The
about?
sheriff.
Yeah, the sheriff. I mean, I don't know if he's in jail now, or I mean, he's been trying to keep postponing his jail term. I think he did get sentenced to jail because he was trying to get like an informant or something like that, and or the FBI was looking for an informant, and I mean there was just all kinds of corruption
Hmm.
going on,
Hmm.
and that he kept moving on, taking him off the books because there was I guess an undercover FBI person trying to
Hmm.
trying to find out what's going on in the jail systems, and once Lee Baca found out about it, that he when they went to go pick him up, they kept moving him around so that they couldn't find him, and it was I don't know all the
It
details, but
Well, it speaks to corruption, right?
yeah,
I think
exactly.
I think all of us, it's human nature to, if we look at power, right? Where is the power? Lee Vacas had the power.
Hmm.
One of the biggest national, in terms of nation, biggest departments, right? The sheriff's
Hmm.
department in LA County, and it's about power, right? It's about power, just like the BLM movement. It's about power. We're freaking tired of being stepped on by people in power, and that's kind of what I like to look at. It's like, where is the power? So for our listeners out there, that's a question. It's almost a rhetorical question, but look at yourselves, or look at the society. What kind of society do we really want to live in? Is it acceptable to keep putting up with all the hate? Is it acceptable to keep putting up with our brown people getting slaughtered? Is it acceptable for a police officer to keep getting acquitted? No, right? At least I don't want to be part of that kind of social contract, or I don't want to be part of that society. So, as a brown man, what can I do? What can I do if I'm not comfortable being a political activist, for example? But what can I do with my own family?
Yeah, and that's the key issue right there, Raul, is power. And we have to remember there's this constitution called for the people and by the people.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people that have the power. We've forgotten that, and through many reasons why we have given we have we have given up our power and gave it to other people, because power means you have to be responsible. Power means you have to educate yourself. Power means you have to communicate with people around you. As I said earlier, power is about money. Follow the money. And why is it that a majority of people that are incarcerated in this country happen to be people of color? Why? Because there's money to be made. There's this really great book called The New Jim Crow that talks about how the prison industrial complex and the breakdown of the political system, or the ability to be able to vote, has basically kept black folks specifically, but people in color in general, have taken away their power from being able to be citizens, being able to vote, being able to be part of this political process as well as part of this economic system. That's something that we should really think about and look into. I mean, why do they not want us to be a part of the system?
It's about power, man. That's a good point right there. It's the point, right? You have the winners, you have the losers, right? A polite society, right, is a calm or unactive
Also,
society is a good society, right? It's good for business. But if you start ruffling some feathers, people get upset or they get their head bashed in. Now I could tell you this, right? Not to talk bad about our white folks, our white brothers and sisters out there, but if the white community stands up and they demand accountability, people are more inclined to listen, and there's that inequality there.
Well, there's when the crack epidemic was here, they didn't pay that much attention because it was mostly in colored neighborhoods and everything,
Hmm. Hmm.
But now when all these like white people are heroin
Yeah.
and eh,
Suburban, middle class,
yeah,
upper class
now
kids, white kids.
it's hitting closer to home, and
It's
so
yeah.
and they have the money to send them to rehabs and everything like that, versus over here, what did they do? Just lock them up,
Yeah, but
in the
remember, it was a national crack epidemic. Shit, the word epidemic was in that movement. Think about that.
yeah.
Hmm. And when was this taking place? It was taking place in the 80s.
Mhm.
What happens a few years later? Rodney King.
Hmm.
All these things are connected, folks. I mean, this is why Black Lives Matter really matters. This is why this movement matters. People are what they're saying woke. They're woke. They're awakened to
Hmm.
the realities of what's going on. And in the suburb where I work in, there were peaceful protests and demonstrations over there. And you know who was organizing? It was young white women and
Nice.
young brown women, teenagers organizing these events. And yeah, it was predominantly white folks or European American folks out there. But you know what? That's just demographics. I did not see this, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Hmm.
This is where it's changing, man. I
And
mean, it's, people that were not affected felt that they were not affected.
hmm.
They're realizing they are affected.
Hmm.
They're realizing that, you know what? I may not be black, I may not be brown,
Hmm.
I may
Hmm.
not be red, but ignorance isn't bliss. By me denying the realities of what's going on, maybe I am part of the problem.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe I shouldn't be doing that anymore. Maybe I shouldn't be like an ostrich putting my head in the sand. Because if I don't do something about this, then what's going to be in it in the future for me? And if I decide to have kids, and these are teenagers that are
I
saying
know.
this,
Hmm.
teenagers, I think we as brown men, you know, maybe we should start thinking about that as well. It's like, how will this affect our kids and our grandkids?
Hmm.
What does it take for us to stand up? I mean, does it take
Another
someone
death.
to beat us or
Hmm.
beat our kids
To hit
to
right
finally say,
home.
you know what, this is not right? Because, a little background for me. I mean, the reason I'm really passionate about this is because I've had my head battered over multiple times by let's just say enthusiastic police officers
Hmm.
that didn't need to do what they did, but they did it, you know. And whether it was because I was brown or whether it was just because I was just the person voicing and understanding my constitutional rights and my human rights to use my voice and knowing how to use my voice,
Hmm.
that they said no. And they didn't say no verbally. They said no with a baton.
Hmm.
I
And this has
remember
happened multiple times in my
Hmm.
life.
one time when you came down, when you were living up in Santa Cruz, you came down here, and then I don't know, somebody invited us to a backyard party, and it was like those disco parties, If Ruben came here, he was all with his long hair and everything, he's all hippie. And then after that, the cops came, they started breaking it up, and Ruben's all like, "Oh, isn't it interesting how the cops just come in without any warrants?" And he's all like, and then I
Hmm.
just remember you can't, I don't know what the heck, they just threw you inside a cop car. And then after that, we were like, everybody, cops, disperse, disperse. We're all like, I go, well, I told the people I was with, well, let's go drive around. Once it dies down, let's see if they dropped them off or what. And after that, we come back, and then after that, we tell the owners, "Hey, what happened to? Oh, the cops took the hippie."
Damn
I don't
hippie.
even know how you got home that day, but yeah, remember that you were all like pointing out everything that the cops were doing wrong. Oh yeah, this like doing all your
Yeah,
activists,
yeah. I didn't get home that night. I actually stayed I was incarcerated for basically 3.5 days.
for just
Yeah.
pointing out what they were
Yeah.
doing wrong.
Yeah,
I mean,
civil
because
disobedience.
Ruben wasn't, Ruben's not a violent person. He was just like, oh, isn't it interesting? Just like pointing out all the things that the cops were doing wrong and everything. And then I remember that they just, they're, oh yeah, the cops took the hippie.
But that's it's funny and we can laugh about it and but how many times, right, has it didn't turn out that way, right? The
Yeah.
cops killed the hippie.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, and that's
Hippie
that kind
bashing.
of hippie bashing, and that sucks, and our podcast kind of opened up with Black Lives Matter, and this is why it matters because unfortunately um, the death of another young or African American folks or person in this case, sparked a fire in a lot of people, black, white, green, purple, blue, red, whatever color you are, and we're doing something. We're standing up, from the suburbs to the inner cities. And I'm pretty hopeful that this is
Wake
a
up call.
movement, a wake up call, a movement that we're saying enough is enough. Let's get some accountability. And then, and my thing is, and this is why it matters. It freaking matters because we're so fed up and we're tired. And we don't need another person to die to start up again. We don't need another brown person to get falsely accused and murdered by the authorities. We need to look inward, right? We need to look inward, as Ruben was saying earlier, and figure out what can we do now? What are we accountable for?
And it begins with sitting down and looking at yourself and asking yourself, is this right or is this wrong? And the next question is, what can I do about it? And the next question, will I do something about it? And part of that, can I do something about it, means educating yourself.
Well, look at us in terms of talking about stuff. Who would have thought 20 years, 30 years ago, right after Rodney King, we'd be talking about these kinds of issues, man. Back then, we were the little youngsters, 18, 19, maybe 20 years old, and here we are in our 40s talking about the same kind
Yeah,
of
I was going to
stuff.
say, we probably thought, this is going to be the wake up call. That's it. There's not going to be no more police brutality. Oh, how can there be police brutality after, they caught him on film?
And the only way that we can grow and evolve as individuals, as families, as communities, as a nation is to look in that mirror and ask yourself, am I okay with this? Is this representative of who I am? Is this representative of how I want to raise my children and my grandchildren? And ask that serious question. It's not about one white cop killing a black man. It's more than that.
Yeah, so I want to basically say that, don't underestimate the power of the BLM movement or question its legitimacy. It's bringing awareness to institutional racism. Remember, police are civil servants and they work for us.
So Black Lives Matter. And we have to remember, black is a shade. We're all the same. Go ahead and visit our websites, loscompaslounge.com, and join in on the discussion. We want to hear you. Your voice matters. Until next time, compas, peace be with you.
Yeah, be safe.
Stay strong.